What is going on to all my MCU fans out there, and welcome to today's discussion, deep dive discussion, spoiler discussion for the 37th film in the MCU, and that is
the Fantastic Four.
First Steps, a film I've had a very interesting relationship from the announcement of the film, the director, the casting, the teasers, the trailers, and here we are talking about it. Full spoiler discussion. We're talking about a plot breakdown. We're discussing the characters, what worked, what didn't work, the ending, the mid and post-credit scene, and also the greater conversation about the MCU and where I feel the MCU is after this film. So again, full spoilers ahead. Now, before we break it all down, I want to take this time to thank you all for clicking on this video, whether you're watching it on YouTube or on Spotify, because this will be available on Spotify and also Apple Podcasts. So do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, leave your thoughts in the comments, what you think about the film, what worked, what didn't work, all that fun stuff in the comment section, and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and following me on all my podcast forms. So I thought the best way to open up this discussion, again, full spoilers ahead, just want to warn you all, we're breaking it all down. Let me share with you all my relationship with the Fantastic Four and my excitement leading up to the film. So first and foremost, as I've said many times on this channel, I was born and raised in the DC world. I'm a big DC comic fan. DC characters are my thing, but I appreciated Marvel growing up. I was invited with Marvel to the cartoon side, the animated side with Spider-Man, X-Men, and characters like that. But as I got into my older years, let's say teenage years, I dove a little bit more into the comics and really came to be a big Marvel fan. But I'm always DC at heart. But as it pertains to the Fantastic Four, honestly, I wouldn't say I wasn't a fan, I just was never compelled by them. Like, as far as the pecking order, as far as big groups in the Marvel landscape, it was always X-Men, Avengers, and then Fantastic Four. And it was nothing wrong with them. I just wasn't as interested in their stories and the characters and their family dynamic. But I appreciate it when they pop up in comics. I never sat down and read an entire comic book run, but I am familiar with some of their bigger runs and their characters and their villains and what have you. I've seen the live action movies, which listen, the first two Tim Story films have a special spot in my heart, but they're not good movies. And then we don't even talk about the Josh Trank, was it 2015? That is abysmal, to say the least. So, my relationship with the Fantastic Four is I wouldn't say I'm a diehard fan, but I respect what they mean to Marvel being the first family and what they represent and how they've kind of inspired a lot of the characters that we've come to love to date. So I respect the characters, but again, I wouldn't call myself a diehard Fantastic Four fan. So with all that said, we get the announcement that they're making a Fantastic Four. Having been a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe since the 2008 with Iron Man, I've always known that Kevin Feige just couldn't wait to get his hands on, during the time they were with Fox, X-Men and Fantastic Four. And when he announced that they were going to finally make it with Jon Watts as the director, I wasn't too excited. Now, this is no disrespect to Jon Watts. I like his Spider-Man films. Some of them I love. I really love Homecoming. I could not stand Far From Home. And I really enjoyed No Way Home. It has some really outstanding moments, especially with the three Spider-Man on screen. But I never felt like Jon Watts put himself into the film. Of course, they had the John Hughes personality and taking Peter to his younger age in high school and what have you. And Jon Watts has his moments, but I never felt like those films felt like a Jon Watt movie, right? I felt like it was just kind of mass produced, in my opinion. So I wasn't overly excited because I'm like, man, Fantastic Four. Even though I wasn't a big fan, I'm like, there's a style, there's a way to bring these characters that I think a different director could bring them to life and bring them to life in the right way compared to the other times we've seen them on screen. So I wasn't excited. But then, and listen, I'm not advocating for people to lose. And it wasn't like he lost his job. They just said it was creative differences. I believe Jon Watts went on to do, Star Wars stuff, and he did, produced Final Destination. And I'm sure he's going to come back to Marvel at some point. But I was like, I'm glad he's no longer attached to the project. And I was happy when they announced that Max Shakman was going to be the director, because prior to WandaVision, which I'm sure a lot of you all know his work from WandaVision, I've been a fan of Matt since his time with It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, directing over 50 or 40 something episodes. He's done a couple episodes of Game of Thrones, which I love. Succession, one of my favorite shows. I love what he did there. So I was a big fan of Max Shakman. And then once he entered into the MCU with WandaVision, the rest is history. We know, at least in my opinion, I feel like it's universally accepted that WandaVision is one of the better shows that Marvel has produced. You know, Loki, WandaVision are the two top MCU shows for me personally. So we get him attached, and then the rumors, the speculation, who's going to be Reed, who's going to be Sue, who's going to be Johnny, and the Thing, and all the different casting, I believe, with Margot Robbie, Emma Stone, Adam Driver. I mean, there was just so many lists of different actors that were apparently in the running for the roles. But then we inevitably got the casting of Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Joseph Quinn, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, and I am a fan of all of them, right? To me, they're all, I would say, recognizable faces. Like, a lot of them come from the TV realm, obviously with Narcos for Pedro and the Game of Thrones, and obviously Last of Us and Mandalorian. Vanessa Kirby, I believe the first time I saw her was during The Crown. We have Evan, who's been across different TV shows. Marvel, for example, he was in The Punisher, I believe season 1. But of course, a lot of us know him as Cousin from The Bear. And Joseph, 3 years, I can't believe it's been 3 years that he's just become a household name at a certain extent, with obviously Stranger Things and Gladiator 2 more recently, and Quiet Place, Day One. So again, individually, I'm a fan of all of them. But I was thinking to myself, is this the Fantastic Four? Can they pull it off? Can they pull off that family dynamic? Because these are all, again, all different actors, all at a different point in their careers. Is this the right choice of characters? And look, as I've said in my review, I think they knocked it out of the park. And we'll talk about it more in the breakdown here, but I thought for the most part, they all brought the, again, not being a diehard fan, but knowing what I know of the Fantastic Four, they really, truly brought these characters to life. So with all that said, that's my relationship. That was kind of my expectations, my thoughts on the announcements and all this stuff until we get to this point. Leading up to this movie releasing, I've been watching the teasers, the trailers, the behind the scenes, clips, scenes, and I've really been building myself to just being really excited to see this movie. And as I'm recording this, I saw the film the other day, and I have a spoiler-free review of the movie, which I gave the film a 3.5 out of 5. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts about like the composition of the score, cinematography for performances, that's where that review can get all those details. This is more of like diving deeper into the actual plot of the film and you know, theorizing certain things. So with that said, let's finally get into the breakdown and talk about the story beats. So opening up this film, we open up with a really intimate scene that I really enjoyed. First off, we're in Earth 2, I think it was 828, which it was later revealed that was Jack Kirby's, I believe, his birthday, which is a pretty nice nod. At first, I couldn't, my MCU mind was like going in the track like, 828, have we seen that before? But I was thinking of Multiverse of Madness, and they were in Earth 838. So I was like, is this the same Earth? But I was like, no, that's not the same Earth. But neither here nor there. It is a nice little nod, an homage to Jack Kirby with the Earth being 828 and then being his birthday. But we open with Reed and Sue, and she tells her husband that she's pregnant. And what I loved about this scene, first off, it was just so quiet and intimate and just a welcome into this world, a welcome into this relationship, a welcome into this family dynamic. Again, it just opens the door into this personal moment, into this relationship, and it just shows the side of these superheroes, a side of superheroes that I love to explore, which is their personal life, what wakes them up in the morning, what they fight for, what they believe in, and in this case, it's their family and then growing their family, right, with their soon-to-be son, Franklin Richards. So I just love that we just opened the film like that, and it reminded me of like smaller intimate moments of meeting Clint's family, right, in Age of Ultron, and seeing that side of his family, and seeing, you know, there's other spots throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe and where we are, you know, we're putting the capes aside and we've seen who they are as individuals. And I really love how the film kicks us off in that matter. And we've seen this scene 1,000 times where they're running late for dinner and they announce they're having a kid, and they're just, the joy, the happiness, and the family dynamic was just a great way to kick off this film. Now, for the longest time, we knew that this film was not going to be an origin film, which I was okay with, right? I think even though we've gotten the origin movies, I mean, not everyone knows the fantastic origins, but it's pretty simple. They go into space, they get powers, they come back, and they're heroes, right? It doesn't need to be repeated. But I say all that to say, I loved how the film, for those that maybe aren't too familiar with their origins or aren't too familiar with the characters, we get this montage as they're on I believe it was Ted Gilbert show. He basically not only tells the audience about who the Fantastic Four is, which again, the world knows who they are, but we're the audience at that point, right? As he basically goes over what they've done in the past 4 years as the Fantastic Four. And again, it was just so cool to see them again being looked at as the Beatles of this universe. And we see the montage of them defeating fighting some of their greatest foes, their rogue galleries, which I will say, again, I want to repeat, I'm not an expert at the Fantastic Four, but I know I've done my homework. I know a little bit about the group. I love how they show us throughout this montage of them going against their greatest foes, right? I believe it was Giganto, the Mad Thinker, there was the Red Ghost and his super monkeys, and of course Mole Man. And I will say Mole Man, and it's so funny, I saw a tweet of people like, this film feels like The Incredibles, and it's like, this movie, the Fantastic Four, inspired The Incredibles, and shout out to Brad Bird. The Incredibles is my favorite Pixar film of all time. But I say all that to say, I remember the only time I compared this to The Incredibles, which again, I know that the Fantastic Four came before The Incredibles, but the montage of them taking down Mole Man reminded me of like the opening of The Incredibles. But it was just incredible to witness all this on screen, seeing them individually saving people, individually using their powers. And I might talk about Superman that just came out 2 weeks ago, but there's a lot of comparisons in regards to dropping us into this world. One of the things that I really appreciated about this, even though I'm a huge Marvel Cinematic fan, I've watched all the movies, all the shows, I own half of the products, it can be daunting to, even though I'm caught up. I know everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I like how there isn't a requirement to have seen 16 other movies, 2 shows, spinoffs, this, that, and the other to understand this world. We are just thrown into the world, but they invite you into this world. We're on this journey. We're experiencing this world for the first time. And I just love that approach. And again, Superman did that a couple weeks ago with their story. And I think for certain characters, big characters like a Superman, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Batman, some of the X-Men characters, you don't need the origins. You don't need to do all this 30, 40-minute exposition of explaining the situation. So I like how they did that. I also like establishing this world. I thought the world building was handled so well within this opening sequence. Now, as we transition from the fighting of the villains and capturing villains, I love how they show that Sue is kind of like a leader of this world. She's kind of the connective tissues to the different world nations and the different countries. And this is where we kind of get a bigger moment. And it happens later in the film too, where we see them making a treaty to allow Mole Man to have his subterranean underground. And we see the different countries, and Sue's on a podium and giving her speech. And we see that there's one country that isn't present, and we see this later on in the film as well. And that country is Liberia. And if you all do not know, that is the country that Dr. Doom is the king of, he's the ruler of. And he wasn't present during this meeting and also a meeting later on in this film. So the question I have for you all, and I'll answer it after I pose the question to you all, is that Dr. Doom, assuming that that's Dr. Doom who's not present, is that RDJ's Dr. Doom? Or is that Marvel's kind of, I don't want to say plan B, but it's like their fail-safe, where we're going to see RDJ in Avengers Doomsday. We're going to see him in Secret Wars. And I think that's it. I don't think they're going to continue to pay Robert Downey Jr. $50 million for movies. Even if he wants to come back, they're like, all right, we appreciate your service, but we got to move on. But anyway, I am to assume that, my personal opinion, that Liberia isn't RDJ's. It's not Robert Downey Jr.'s Dr. Doom. I think he comes from another universe. I think this is Marvel's way of saying, once we get done with the Avengers film, Secret Wars, we do the reset, and we'll talk more about this towards the post-credit scene when we break that down. But I think they build in a little fail-safe, which is like, once they defeat or whatever happens at the end of Secret Wars, this world, Earth 828, will still have their Doctor Doom. And that Doctor Doom could be the Doctor Doom for the continuation of the reset of the MCU. So I could be wrong. It could be RDJ. He could be from their world, but I don't think he is. I think they have their own Doctor Doom that they're familiar with that wasn't present during these meetings, that they have issues and beef with. And even though they don't mention him throughout the film, that Liberia Easter egg, to me, alludes to he's somewhere out there scheming and planning. But I don't think that's RDJ. I think that's another Doctor Doom that they can introduce after Secret Wars. Now, getting back to the main plot. Now, after seeing how much the world loves the Fantastic Four, in comes the Herald of Galactus, and that is Silver Surfer. And again, this was just, even though I've seen this scene 1,000 times online, I've seen the memes of, I herald your beginning, I herald your end, I herald Galactus. I love the scene. I love how cold and bleak and how like the way the voice is modulated. I'm a huge Julia Garner fan. Like, shout out to Ruth from Ozark. She's a great actress, and I'm so happy for her because her TV career is great. She's won Academy Awards. She's won Emmys, and she is, had a great career on television. Can't say the same for her movie career thus far, and particularly even this year alone with Wolfman, which I thought was a terrible movie, but I'm just glad that Julia gets her moment to shine and gets, even though obviously she's in CGI, but still, you get the gravitas. You feel the weight from her performance as Silver Surfer, as Shia LaBeouf. I really enjoyed her, and I love that scene. And again, we see Johnny chasing after her, and they have the moment where she says her language to him, and it was just, listen, up until this point, I was locked in. I'm going to explain this in a little bit. Like, I thought the first half was damn near perfect, and this was just one of those moments, one of those scenes where, again, even though I've seen it a bazillion times, it was still so great to see on the big screen, which I saw this in IMAX, and we'll talk about Galactus here in a second, but it was just such a cinematic experience to witness all these things transpire on the big screen. Now, this sets up, which we'll talk about later on, Johnny's subplot with him trying to translate what she said to him. Meanwhile, we see the intellect, we see the levels of desperation and how challenging it is for Reed to not understand something. He's able to, and again, showing how smart he is, how quick he's able to think on his feet. He's able to detect following Silver Surfer, all these different planets she's went to that has been destroyed, and he's able to track her down to this one planet. And switching off, veering off, and talking about the performance here from Reed, which I will say, I said in my review, and I thought about it a little bit more. I said in my spoiler-free review that out of the four, Pedro's performance wasn't as stand-outish as the other three for me personally, but I thought about it more. I'm like, yeah, no, it was pretty damn good, especially seeing him dealing with trying to solve a problem and how much that affects him when he can't figure out, is his son going to have powers? How am I going to defeat Galactus? The pressure, the anxiety, the pressure he puts on himself, the pressure the world puts on himself. I thought Reed played that pretty well. And also, I don't know, maybe in an interview or there's confirmation, but I felt like Reed was on the spectrum a little bit as far as a personality trait, which I thought was an interesting portrayal of the character. But I just thought there was a level of dedication that I appreciated from Pedro. And I don't think we've ever seen him portray a role like this before, as far as like one of the smartest men in the universe, right? If not the smartest. So I want to give props to Pedro. I thought that he did it. Again, I thought about it a little bit further. He really did a good job, and I really love, again, just seeing that level of intellect from, again, one of the smartest characters in Marvel's comics. Now, I also want to take a brief moment to talk about, I talked about it in my review, but I also want to bring it up here, the aesthetics. The 1960s futuristic retro vibe was such a great decision because it captures, these characters were invented during that time period, and it really captured that time and that superhero vibe, right? And I loved how, again, going back to Superman, how that film embraced the comic booky side of Superman, how this film embraced the Jack Kirby of it all and the comic booky nature of these characters. I love the aesthetic. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the same set designers were the same set designers from Loki, which I think is one of the best produced TV shows and one of the best produced Marvel projects to date. I love the aesthetic. I love the attention to detail. As I've said before, Kevin Feige, the team, Max Shakman, they really put a lot of heart in this. So an attention to detail that I appreciated. But I just wanted to, again, I talked about it in my review. I just wanted to mention again, the vibe, the aesthetic, the look, Michael Giacchino's score, like all the productional value in this movie was exceptional. Now, at this point, they come up with the plan to go back into space, which Johnny was happy for, which, again, I'll talk about it a little bit further as far as some of the shortcomings. Johnny wanting to get back into space and how their experience in the space was something I wish was explored a little bit more. And we see that later on as far as him decoding that message. But I love the kind of the race to space, the space race aspect of them going back to space to finding Galactus and how they got their ship back up and running. And even though Sue was pregnant, man, she was still about her business. Like, she had to take care of business and not only protect the world, but to protect her family. And they're ready to go. I love all that build up there. And let me tell y'all something now. As we'll discuss here and break it down further, this whole space exploration, as a huge science fiction fan, horror and science fiction are my two favorite genres. All this science fiction stuff was just scratching an itch for me, man. Like, I love the space exploration. I love the visual composition of the shots and how seeing this in IMAX, them taking off in space, the launch of the going off in space, them going into the lightning speed into finding Galactus, all that stuff was fantastic. So as they find Galactus planet, they are like, what's going on? There's no life form. And they see that he's literally consuming, they're interrupting his meal. He's consuming this planet. They get swept up into the current of the gravitational pull, and then Galactus ships key in on them. And oh, man, I loved how they used Silver Surfer. I just loved how she was like just the herald, right? And just how she delivered her line to deliver the message as she comes into their ship and says, Galactus will see you now. You should have never come. Like, I just loved it. So they go on the ship. They're trying to get some information out of her, and this is where her and Johnny, they're kind of side plotting. Their relationship is kind of starting to develop, and the whole Johnny loves space, Johnny loves girls, and now there's a naked space girl that he's in love with. I love all that stuff. He talks to her and says, what did you say to me? What was that translation? And she says that basically, I don't know the language she speaks, but it basically translated to die with yours, which we find out later what it means to her, but also the idea of like being with your loved ones, which is a big theme in this film, family and being with the ones you love and what have you. But that whole dynamic was interesting, but then things level up. Literally level up as they are introduced to Galactus. All I was in seeing Galactus, and also just knowing that we finally get to see Galactus properly on screen compared to what we saw in the Fantastic Four sequel in, what was it, 2005 or whatever, that cloud of Galactus, which was just nonsense. But just the massiveness of the character, the scope, the scale was, again, in IMAX, was so crazy to see. And it reminded me of, I know a lot of people don't like this film. I love the movie. It's one of my favorites in the more recent phases. The Eternals, right? Seeing the Celestials and seeing how huge they are and how small they make humans look and how Earth looks so small to them. They captured that sense of awe with Galactus, and it was just so menacing. And to add on top of the look, I'm a huge Ralph Ineson fan. Like, I remember seeing him, was it 2015 when The Witch came out? Robert Eggers' The Witch. That was my first time being exposed to him. I'm like, first off, he looks, the part in that particular film, but the voice, I'm like, this is a other earthly voice. And one of my favorite performances from him is him in The Green Knight. The voice is so fantastic and that perfect cast. I know for a while, I think there were rumors that Antonio Banderas and there were some other people's name in the mix, but I think that they picked the perfect actor to voice the character Galactus, because again, the look, the sound, the voice, the performance was amazing in my opinion. But just seeing them interacting with Galactus for the first time and how they were like, we were honored to be in your presence and we would like to make a deal with you if that's possible. So it's in this moment that Galactus senses, with his celestial goddish abilities, he senses the baby, Franklin. And help me out in this moment, correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like Galactus almost sped up the pregnancy process, because yes, we obviously saw Sue was pregnant. I don't know how far along she was, but it seemed like him noticing and acknowledging Franklin almost not awakened, but like sped up the pregnancy process, because she, as we see, she's about to give birth. But he says that he'll spare the earth if they will give him Franklin. Obviously, they're not going to do that. He wants the baby because of the powers the baby has, which I don't know if the film did a good enough job. I know who Franklin is. I know what he's capable of, but I don't know if the film did a good job of explaining to people that might not be aware of what the importance of Franklin is, but we'll discuss that later. But they don't give up the child. We see them escaping, and we get to see them using their powers, which, by the way, let me bring this up now because I totally forgot to bring this up in my review. The look of the powers, how they use their powers was really great. I loved how it looked visually. All that stuff just was very visually pleasing. Now, I think it's safe to say, at least for me, this is one of the most stunning and the most science fiction moments of the entire MCU. As we see the team now on the ship running from Galactus, and particularly running from Silver Surfer, we get to see Ben, who I'll talk about more in depth a little bit later. We could see him stepping up, being a pilot. And also, just on that note, I love that the film didn't forget that they're astronauts and they all are smart and intelligent individuals, which I really enjoy. But as they're preparing to leave, Sue's about to give birth. Johnny's trying to fight against Silver Surfer. And again, as I talk about the visual palette and the satisfaction of the science fiction fan as a nerd of space exploration, this scene was everything to me. We see Silver Surfer chasing after them. They're going into this black hole. All of the visuals look so real. And I can't remember who said this, but there was a tweet when they showed this at the premiere, and someone said that they compared this to Interstellar, which, if you all don't know this about me, Interstellar is not only my favorite Christopher Nolan film, but it's one of my favorite science fiction films of all time. And when they said that, I'm like, there's no way, like, respectfully, this person's on crack comparing a Marvel film to the cinematic masterpiece of Interstellar. But I apologize. That person it's not Interstellar in its tone and all that stuff, but visually speaking, when they're in that black hole and we see the black hole and them there and Silver Surfer surfboarding on a black hole, maybe one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I know Silver Surfer's done that a few times, surfing in space and surfing on black holes in comics, but seeing it in live action was pun intended, fantastic. I love that scene. And again, I love them, just all the stuff going on, how they're using their intellect to come up with the idea of slingshotting off of the black hole to go back to Earth, and how they're, Sue, which I love the representation of a mother's power during this time, like literally giving birth, pushing out her child, hence the title, First Steps, but also her using her abilities to make them invisible while they're hiding from Silver Surfer, her giving birth. That scene was so intimate, so powerful, so beautiful. Them tricking Silver Surfer to getting trapped into the black hole, which they trapped her in there for like a month or so. Again, this scene was perfect. This is my favorite scene of the entire film. One of my favorite scenes of the Marvel Cinematic Experience. Like, I loved everything about this scene. Now, again, I do want to backtrack, and I want to highlight Vanessa Kirby in this moment. She's great throughout the film. As I said in my review, she's kind of the heart of the film. The idea of motherhood and seeing her giving birth, but also still having the ability to using her abilities, and the way Vanessa plays that vulnerability, but also that strength, all in a one scene, perfectly, to me, encapsulates Sue Storm and showing her abilities as just an all-powerful being that's willing to protect her family by any means necessary. So I thought, again, that just adds to the greatness of the scene, from a great performance by all the rest of the cast. But to me, Vanessa Kirby was a standout, on top of the cool-looking Silver Surfer chasing them throughout space. So after she gives birth to Franklin, they're gone for a month. They finally arrive back to their Earth, and they immediately, and this just kind of shows the celebrityism and the heroism of them, they have to immediately jump in to answer for what just happened in space. Did they defeat Galactus? And I'll speak for myself. If I was Reed in the Fantastic Four, I would have kept the part where he wanted our son in exchange for the Earth. I would have kept that to myself. But that's why they're heroes. They don't lie, even though I thought they should have lied. But anyway, Reed tells them, number one, they didn't defeat the Galactus, and Johnny's like, we'll figure it out, just to kind of back up his big brother. But then he tells them that he wanted to exchange our son for the Earth, and we didn't make that bargain. They didn't make the exchange, and we see the press throwing all these questions. What does that mean for us? And the one guy says, are we safe? He says, I don't know. And again, that moment, knowing who Reed is at this point of the film, knowing how him saying that had to be one of the most devastating things to come out of his mouth. Like, he doesn't have an answer. He doesn't know if they're safe. And the way Pedro plays that scene was fantastic. So just to recap, the first 30 to 40 minutes to me was damn near perfect. Like, I love the world building, the opening montage, the setting up of who they are in this world, what they mean to this world, the story, the establishing of Galactus' plan, Silver Surfer, like all that stuff to set the stage for what I was hoping was going to be a great second into the third act. But this is where my issues with the film come about, where I feel as though the second half of this film and parts of the third act are, to me, the weakest elements of the movie. So what exactly do I mean by that? So as I said in my review, and I'll elaborate on it more here, I felt the under 2 hour runtime, I believe it clocks in at like 1 hour and 55 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, like literally under 2 hours. This is where I feel like that 2 hour runtime affected this narrative. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't tell a good story in 2 hours or under 2 hours. It doesn't mean you need 3 hours to tell this particular story. But I feel like for this narrative that we got, for what I thought that they were giving us, I feel like the execution of certain elements, as we'll talk about here, felt a little rush and didn't feel fully explored, for me at least. For example, I mentioned I love the look of the CGI of Ben. I love Evan's motion capture performance, and I was a big fan of Ben Grimm. I thought he was a phenomenal. I don't want to keep saying fantastic, but I thought he was a great portrayal of the character. I did feel out of the entire group, he got the short end of the stick from like a character development. Like they hint at him still being affected, even though it was 4 years ago. He still is affected by the transformation. I don't think he's fully accepted him becoming the Thing, right? There's still some, there's a scene where he looks at what he used to look like in the television screen, and you can tell that affects him. And there's also another example, Natasha Lyonne, who plays a character, I believe her name was Rachel Rosman. She was a teacher. She's an original character. She's in a comic book character. Number one, big fan of Natasha Lyonne. That relationship, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. We barely scratch the surface on that. Like, she comes up later in the film where he goes to see her at the church, alluding to a further relationship. But all the stuff from Ben, his transformation, his level of like feeling completely different from the group, obviously physically and probably mentally, and him not having the, finding love. Can he find love if someone can't accept him for who he is? And seeing that with Rachel, I just wish that was explored more. I wish they gave Ben a little bit more, which speaks to me saying another 10, 15, hell, another 20 minutes would have, to me, given Ben more of those things to explore from the character. Another example of the execution not being all the way there for me in the second half, the idea of the world now essentially turning their backs on the Fantastic Four, a la similar to Superman, with the whole message from his parents, Kryptonian parents, and how the world turned their back so quickly on Superman. We have a similar story beat here where the world's like, you won't give up your son to protect us? Like, what makes you different, right? They hint at that. We see Ben in walking in the alley, and someone says, what about our families? Like, that's like the only level. And then we see the people on the news and how they're looking at them in the balcony, and it's almost like they're above them at that certain point in the film. I felt like it was kind of wrapped up really quickly, because we see Sue, which it was a good speech, her monologue to like speaking to, I won't sacrifice my son for the earth, but I won't sacrifice the earth for my son. Like all that stuff like emotionally worked, but I just felt like we could have explored more of the hatred towards the Fantastic Four, more of the resentment of like, what makes your son more important than our world, and what makes your son more important than my son and my daughter and my husband, my wife, my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad. So I wish there could have been more time to spend on that level of how these beloved figures, these godlike figures, these saviors of the world are now hated. Like, I just wish that we could have spent a little bit more time exploring that idea. Now, again, kind of backtracking, Sue gives her speech to the people. She introduces the world to her son. Again, a really good speech. I just feel like the execution was kind of undercut by feeling a little rushed, which also this speech sparks the idea from Reed of like, okay, moving, because she says in her speech, my mom would tell me, she mentions her dad, how their mother died and her dad wasn't there. We don't get to see their dad in this film, but that's maybe something we can explore later on. But she mentions how her mom used to say to her that she would move heaven on earth to protect her child, and that's where Reed gets the idea of moving their planet somewhere else that Galactus can't find them. And again, I like the idea. I like the motivations, but I felt like this, again, was a little bit of a rushed moment, because Reed is able, again, how quickly they turn on the Fantastic Four. They were able to be like, okay, that was a good speech. Now we're back to loving them. And then like Reed is able to gather up not just their town or city, and not just their location, but the entire world decides to, okay, they're right. Listen, I understand it makes sense, because they want to live, right? They don't want to die. So of course they would make the decision to eventually jump on board. But I feel like they mentioned in one of the news clippings that there were people that believed in Galactus, that were like open to the idea of the end of the world. But then like the whole world is like, okay, let's decide to build these bridges, because again, this is another plot that was introduced early in the movie, where Reed is coming up with this device that can transport things from one place to the next, which is something that ties into Doctor Doom, and we actually see that being used by John Krasinski's Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness. So we see that idea on a much grander scale, and them building these bridges. And again, it takes a year. I won't say they rushed that. It did take a year. Even though I think it would have taken a little bit longer. But again, knowing that this is like a futuristic world, we see that like they're in a much different time. They have technology at their disposal. So we see them making the bridges and the world coming together. And I'm like, it's all good and dandy, but I just wish that there was, again, more pushback, maybe people not being so on board with this idea and what have you. But again, it just it resolved itself too quickly for me. And last but not least, my other example of this truncated runtime that affected the story and the fleshing out of the characters and motivations and things of that nature. There's a moment where Reed had thought about the idea, because he thinks about all the options, the good, the bad, the ugly, and one of the ideas was maybe we should give Galactus our son. And we see Reed and Sue have a disagreement about that, and there's a pushback and there's friction in the relationship. I wanted more of that. I wanted more of that pushback. I wanted more within the family dynamic, not just from Reed and Sue, but from maybe Ben, maybe Johnny. Maybe they don't agree with how things are being played out. I wish there was more of that to be explored. Again, understanding they're a family. They've been the Fantastic Four for 4 years. They've probably had battles where they don't always agree. But again, I feel like there was something to explore with Reed and Sue, and how Reed sometimes thinks of all the bad things, and how she even says in the scene, like, your decisions affect me. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Can we get more of that drama? I wish there was more to explore within this marriage that seems to be perfect. But that's one of the dynamics from the comics, is like, yeah, they are a beautiful husband and wife, but Namor gets into the mix, and there's friction with Doctor Doom romantically and all that different stuff. I wish there was a little bit more of that friction and that kind of off balance of their relationship, which was demonstrated in this moment, but I wish there was more moments to explore that. So now getting back into like the positives in this second half, one of the stronger elements in the second half for me was the continuation of Johnny Storm's subplot of trying to decode the translation from the Silver Surfer. And I'm a big Johnny Storm fan, and I really enjoyed Joseph Quinn's portrayal. I love Chris Evans' portrayal, but that plays to one side of the character for the most part. Where this, we get to see, the little brother energy, the ladies' man energy, but also the intellect. I really enjoyed how the film focused on Johnny trying to figure out what was being said in the message. And man, I gotta say, I think I was most impressed by Joseph Quinn's portrayal, because I didn't know if he had that in him as an actor. Again, we've only seen, at least for me, I've only seen him in a handful of projects, from Stranger Things, Gladiator, A Quiet Place, and all great performances, but I didn't know if he can pull Johnny Storm off, and I thought he did take another shot at home. I thought he did a fantastic job in the role. Now back to the main plot. We have Reed coming up with the idea of having this bridge across the world and being able to use the energy to transport their planet to somewhere else that Galactus can't find, or he'll find, but it'll take, be like a distant galaxy that's going to take light years to find them, if I'm not mistaken. So they're at the point where they're going to do the launch, and unfortunately their plans are destroyed by Silver Surfer, who's destroying all the bridges. She's on her way to New York. She's about to get the baby, as Galactus wanted, and this is where Johnny confronts her. And again, Johnny's mission is to decode the message, which he does, and he plays her the message. And they mention her name, Shalabal, and it brings her back to her flashback moment. So within the flashback sequence, we see Julia Garner in her human form. We see her with her daughter on her home planet. We see she makes a sacrifice, which is very, Norman Rad, who a lot of us know as the Silver Surfer in the comics. And again, I wish they could have expanded upon the flashback. I wonder if Norrin is her husband in the flashback, because they don't even mention her husband, I don't think, but I wish we could have fleshed that out a little bit more. But it truncates her backstory into that small kind of moment. But the importance of the scene is that she is turning. She's making the turn. She knows that she's did all these terrible things to be the hero of the Galactus. She's the one that obviously scouts out the planets for him to consume and whatnot. So it was at this point that, again, the backstory I wish was fleshed out more. But again, going back to Johnny, him cracking the code, him using his intellect, and not just the good looks and the charm. He uses his brains to connect with her, and he plants the seed that she is finally realizing that she wants to do right by the people and make a decision she makes later in this film make more sense. Now, as we enter into the final act of the film, I felt it suffered from a trope that we've seen in some Marvel movies and shows, and that is not sticking the landing entirely, at least for me, and kind of feeling rushed, but also having the stereotypical big CGI battle at the end. So with time running out, they come up, or I should say the parents come up. We see Reed and Sue. Even though Sue is not happy with the decision, they decide they're going to use their son as bait to pull Galactus in, come to Times Square in the middle of the city. He's going to cross a certain point, and they're going to use the bridge to take him. The idea now is we're not going to move our planet. We're going to instead move Galactus millions of galaxies away, and it's going to take him eons to find us once we get him trapped into that gravitational pull and these portals they created with the bridge. Now, as we see in the movie, the plan goes horribly wrong. It wasn't that, like, they blind him, they take the baby and put him into their building, lock up the building, leave the baby with Herbie, who I guess I haven't talked about Herbie. Herbie was fine. It's just a toy. It's a droid type of a thing. It's cute, but Herbie's Herbie, whatever. I'm sure people are gonna get tattoos of the character. I thought Herbie was fine, but the plan doesn't go well. We see them using their powers, which was cool, but Galactus is able to sense where the baby is, takes the baby, and now we get to see them really in like a desperation mode. We see the thing get thrown up in space and Johnny goes to save him. We see Reed stepping up and we see his stretching abilities like in full form. And speaking of stretching abilities, this is the one moment where up until this point, we see Galactus' main objective is like he just wants to consume his planet because it's a burden, it's a curse that he has. But we don't really see the menacing nature of his plans and who he really is. But this time we do, as he's literally stretching Reed out. That scene was pretty awesome. But then we see they, say it. It's clobbering time. They distract him. The thing hits Galactus. He lets go of Reed. And this is where we see the power of a mother using her abilities to push, which I'm not going to lie, the meaning and the symbolism of what she's doing to protect her family, it works. I'm just in my head, the MCU power scaling of just like seeing her. Don't get me wrong, for some people, and I believe this is comic book accurate, but Sue is probably the most powerful in the four of them as far as her abilities go. So it makes sense that she's able to do that to Galactus. But I'm just thinking like he's a cosmic god that can literally upscale himself to be bigger than the planet Earth. So I just, I don't really think they explored Galactus's powers to a full extent. Again, I think the MCU has a power scaling problem where sometimes heroes and villains they undercut their powers to fit the narrative, which can be disappointing at times. And I thought this was one of those points where I felt like pushing him was a little bit easy. I don't know. It just felt easy. I just wish there was a better way to handle that moment. But nonetheless, like I said, the emotional weight of the mother pushing herself to save her son, and she ultimately does, and they push him in the portal, but he's not ultimately defeated. He sticks his hand out, he's about to come out of the portal, but then going back to Johnny, him getting his mission complete, this is where he's about to sacrifice himself to put Galactus into the wormhole as well as himself. But in comes Shia LaBeouf. She pushes Johnny aside and she pushes Galactus into the wormhole. And it's safe to assume that we haven't seen the last of this version of Silver Surfer in Galactus. Now, I hate to be a sourpuss, but this next scene didn't really work for me emotionally because I just knew that they weren't going to kill Sue in this moment, even though we see her. She does technically die. I will say she does die. So they don't completely go back on the decision, which was bold, but I'm like, we've seen, at least I'll speak for myself, I've seen Vanessa Kirby talking about shooting Avengers Doomsday. She's on the set shooting, so I'm like, I know she's not dead, but I guess it's just like me knowing more behind the scenes that kind of took me out of the moment. But we see she does die, and there is a little bit of emotion seeing Pedro trying to wake her up, and for the first time in a long time, he's not the one that dies, right? Because everything he ends, I think that's like part of his contract that he must die, but he doesn't die in this one. Instead, he's trying to bring her back. We see Johnny, we see the thing, like it's emotional, it's sad. It's just like, oh, this is so silly. Or no, I don't want to say it's silly. I just feel like they didn't explain this well enough, showing the abilities of Franklin. But they put Franklin, which I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like if my wife dies in front of me, I'm not about to put my child on her dead body. But he does. He puts Franklin on her chest and a miracle happens. He's able to resurrect her, which again, I know a lot of his abilities involve time warping, reality warping, creating worlds, creating realities, resurrecting people. I know that, but I don't think the film does a good enough job of, I don't want to say explaining that because that's the journey. Like, okay, let's figure out who this kid is. But I just felt like there could have been a better way to. Let me know in the comments if you guys aren't familiar with Franklin. Did that seem out of left field? That the baby, did you even know that that's what happened in that moment? Let me know how you felt about that. But I just felt, again, the execution could have been handled a little bit better in my eye. I felt it was unearned for Franklin to do that, at least to me. And just let me know if you felt the same or differently in the comments below. But nonetheless, he resurrects his mom. Happy moment. They're all together. The world celebrates their savior saving them, and we end the film. Also, I will throw this out there. For over a year now, myself included, a lot of the fandom believed that the end of the film was going to have either the Fantastic Four losing to Galactus and him consuming their planet, and that's going to lead them into the 616, the sacred timeline and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or they were just going to leave their planet for Galactus to chase them or to, distract them from their planet. But we were wrong, right? They end up saving the planet, which I thought was a nice way to kind of scoopers and the leaks out there. I thought that was I don't know if Marvel always had that as their plan or if they maybe made a switch because people thought that that's what they were going to do. But nonetheless, I was shocked that that was the way that the film ended, that they end up saving their planet. Now, after ending the film, this leads into our first mid-credit scene where we see on the screen 4 years later. We see Sue and Franklin on a couch. They're having some mother-son bonding. I'm not sure where Reed and where Ben and where Johnny are. They're off, doing their thing, but they're at home. We see Sue says, let me get another book for him, a fun book, because he's reading all these like philosophy books because he is intelligent. And as she's getting the book, she's going back to her son and she senses something's off. As she slowly walks back to the living room, she uses her abilities and the camera pans over. And we see this mysterious individual in a cloak, a green cloak, and we see a mask, and we see Franklin touching this mysterious person's face. So let's break it down. First and foremost, it's been confirmed that that scene was shot by the Russo brothers. That's confirmed by Max Shakman. And it makes sense because it literally, like, if you look at that scene visually from like a visual standpoint, like the visual palette and the way it was shot, completely different from the rest of the movie. It looked almost similar to the end credit scene from Thunderbolts, which the Russo brothers also shot, which makes me to believe that we're going to see an extended version of both of those scenes, the Thunderbolts end credit scene and also this end credit scene. We're going to see these scenes fully fleshed out, very similar to what we saw, and I think it was Ant-Man and the Wasp, or maybe the first Ant-Man, where we saw like a full scene from Civil War, and we saw that scene in the actual movie. I'm thinking they're going to do the same thing with Thunderbolts and this mid-credit scene from the Fantastic Four. Now, I think it's safe to assume that the mysterious person that we saw, will be Robert Downey Jr., who's interacting with Franklin, and I think it's safe to assume that, again, we talked about this earlier, is RDJ the Doom that wasn't present in the World Nations meeting with Liberia? Like, he wasn't there. Is that this universe's Doom? Or again, is RDJ from another universe? I think he's from another universe. But I guess the question is that Robert Downey Jr. in the cloak? Is that Dr. Doom that we're going to see in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars? Or is that this universe is Dr. Doom? I am to believe that this is RDJ's Dr. Doom, even though I don't know why they didn't show his face. Well, I guess I do know, because it probably would have cost them $2 billion to have a 10-second or 5-second clip of his face. But again, I think we're going to see this scene like fully fleshed out in the actual Avengers Doomsday. Or again, it could be a different Dr. Doom. Anyway, I do think it's RDJ. I think he uses his teleporting powers or his technology. Again, we saw John Krasinski using that in Doctor Strange. I think he's going to use a similar technology where he can teleport to different universes. And I think he's going to kidnap Franklin Richards and go to the 616 and collect some other items that he needs. Maybe that's Miss Marvel's bangles. Maybe that's Shang-Chi's 10 rings. Maybe that's Century, right? He's collecting all these artifacts to stop the incursions, prevent incursions. Because again, the thing I love about Dr. Doom as one of the greatest comic book characters ever is like he thinks he's the hero of his own story. So in his own way, he thinks he's saving the world by kidnapping a child. Now, let's nerd out here for a second and talk about some of the stuff I know from the comics. Now, from what I remember, Dr. Doom does have a relationship with Reed and Sue's child, but not in the form that we saw in this movie. Normally, in most cases, not in all cases, but normally Dr. Doom does have a relationship with their child, but not Franklin. Instead, their daughter, their youngest daughter, by the name of Valeria. Now, in the comics, Valeria and Dr. Doom are very close. Like, that's her godfather. So it's a very interesting relationship. I am to assume that we might not see Valeria anytime soon, at least, but I'm thinking they're going to use Franklin as both Franklin, as what he represents in the comics, but also substituting what Valeria means to the relationship with Dr. Doom. And the reason I say that is because going back to that scene, also, I want to point out the mask that we see him carrying, I think is the same mask that Robert Downey Jr. had on stage when he was announced to play the character at Comic-Con. But again, looking at the almost, he's being welcoming to Franklin by taking off his mask. If he's going to be disfigured, we know that's like a pretty big thing for him to take off his mask to show who he really is. So for him to take off his mask, for him to allow Franklin to touch his face, that to me opens the door that he wants to approach Franklin with a kind of fatherly type of impression, that you can trust me type of impression. I think he's manipulated him to use his powers, but I think this is opening the possibility of this being Franklin Richards, but also Valeria, all in one character. So again, getting all nerdy and thinking about our last film, Thunderbolts, thinking about that post-credit scene, which we see the Fantastic Four ship, I'm now starting to believe that I think either A, Franklin and Dr. Doom are on that ship, or the parents and the uncles, I'm referring to Sue, Reed, Johnny, and Ben, are on that ship following Dr. Doom to get their son. They are able to transport to the 616 with the bridge that they built at the end of the film, or they have other means to transport or to transfer to different universes. But again, let me know in the comments, after what we know now, do you believe that in the Thunderbolts post-credit scene that Franklin and Dr. Doom are on the Fantastic ship, or are the Fantastic Four on that ship looking for their son? And again, just continuing to nerd out, just thinking about the implications of that scene and thinking about how Franklin Richards will be used moving forward, who, by the way, again, an OP character. I think they're going to use Franklin very similarly to how they use Molecule Man in the Secret Wars run. And I think Franklin's going to serve as Molecule Man. We're going to probably see him age up like he is in the comics. And we're probably going to see Sentry being used as a weapon in Avengers Doomsday, but ultimately in also Avengers Secret Wars. Now, briefly talking about the second actual post-credit scene, which was... it was fun, right? It was a continuation of the opening of the movie, which showed them going against all their villains and whatnot, and we see it in cartoon form. It was just a nice little button to end the film. So we have come to the end. We talked about the beginning, the middle, the end, what worked for me, what didn't work, the performances, the post-credit scene, the mid-credit scene, and what I think will happen moving forward. So again, overall, I gave this film a 3.5 out of 5. It may go up on a second or third rewatch. Overall, though, I thought if the goal was to make me care for these characters individually, but more importantly as a family, as a unit, and make me excited to see more of them, as they're going to probably be the main focus of the MCU moving forward, them and the X-Men, goal was accomplished. Like, I cannot wait to see these characters again. I think this is such a great way to get me more excited for the MCU, because even though I'm a big fan, I've been let down the last few years from their movies and shows. But I think, you know, taking myself out of the equation, I think that other people that might have been checked out of the MCU, this can bring them back in. This will get them excited. You know, this is our last film for the rest of the year, opening up Phase 6. The next movie we'll see is Spider-Man, and then after that, Doomsday in December. As a Marvel fan, I'm happy. I'm satisfied with this film. But also, as a comic book fan, I thought Superman was a good movie. I thought this was a good movie. It's a great time to be alive. We have DC thriving. We have Marvel getting back on track, and I'm excited for the future of both franchises. So with all that being said, man, as we come to the end, let me know what you all thought of the film, other Easter eggs or things I missed, emotional moments, character moments, what worked, what didn't work, your thoughts on the mid, post-credit scene, the future of the MCU, the future of these characters. What do you think about Dr. Doom and all that good stuff? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're listening to this in podcast form, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Consider following the podcast. Leave a like. I would appreciate that. Those watching this on YouTube, I would love if you can hit the thumbs up, share this video, like the video, and consider subscribing if you haven't subscribed already, where we talk about Marvel, DC, Star Wars, independent films, TV shows, and everything in between. So that's the end of this video. Thank you all again for making it to this point of the video. Hope you all enjoyed yourself. Hope you all are staying safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.